Hey, folks, welcome to Wednesday, 4 o'clock p.m. It's an unusual time, but I told you that it was going to be at an irregular time. It was going to be when it was going to be. You can either deal with that or not. I don't promise that Dog Shirt TV will always be at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Sometimes it's going to be at 8 in the morning, and you're just going to have to deal with that. I want to monologue today about this splotch of light on my forehead because this is creates an interesting problem. And as with all interesting problems on Dog Shirt TV, we have to figure out what the policy is. I woke up this morning in a place not my own. I had no idea where I was. I was in a bed in a hotel in Boston, and I had slept soundly enough that I had no idea where I was. I got up late. I had a meeting, and I didn't shave, and I didn't take a shower. And so I am not wholly myself today. And as a result, there is this gleam on my forehead. Now, there are three possible solutions to this. One, wear a hat. I'm not going to wear a hat. There are people who wear hats. I'm just not one of them, except to protect myself from the sun. There's no sun in my office. Fuck that. Number two, makeup. One of the reasons I stopped doing television is that I hate makeup. And I'm not doing television makeup. And number three was the fuck it approach. I've got a splotch of light on my head. I could turn off the light, I could deal with it, but I'm not going to do any of that because the point of this show is high substance, all of which is not the way I look. So that's all there is to it. Deal with the splotch of light on my forehead. I'm dealing with it. You can deal with it. Renee's going to deal with it. It's fine. Look, we're not allowed to have fun anymore. There's a whole industry, multiple industries devoted to the proposition that we should never have fun again. We're going to be bombarded with misinformation and disinformation. Anything that's going to be fun is going to be taken away from us. We're not allowed to have fun, but because we are not Stanford University, we are allowed to have Renee DiResta on Dog Shirt TV. Renee, it is great to see your face. Where are you joining us from?
I am in Charlottesville today. I am in the Graduate Hotel. I don't know if you've ever stayed in one of these, but it looks like a dorm room, kind of like if you went to a very shishy private university dorm, maybe not like my dorm at state school, but the bed
Yeah.
is not
So,
iron. It's a proper bed. But no, it's I'm down here at UVA for a couple days.
what are you doing at UVA?
Um, there is going to be a conference, and it is going to be on generative AI, as all conferences these days are. But no, I'm actually excited. I'm talking about some work on spam and scams, and I am very excited to kind of make the argument that that election disinformation is not really the be all end all of the conversations that we should be having about this stuff. But there's actually other more interesting areas to be looking at.
All right. So let's talk about that argument because you had a uh, somewhat irritated post on Threads today saying that everywhere you go, media or press people are saying to you, Renee, people said this was going to be a disaster. AI was going to be a disaster for the election. It's not a disaster for the election. Why, answer for that. And you said on the Threads thing, yeah, but I never said it was going to be a disaster for the election. And so my question for you is, why do you think you shouldn't have to answer for every stupid thing that anybody has ever said on the subject of election information and disinformation and AI?
I've thought about this lately because there's a couple of these like you must answer for the field. Like you're invited to. I'm going to be doing going down to Vanderbilt next month for a conversation I'm actually kind of excited about free speech and social media, a topic I care a lot about, and but it's framed as like what the hell's the framing? It's something related to is disinformation the end of democracy or a moral panic. And it's like, well, there's a gulf
There's a
between.
large space in between.
Nobody wants to hear about what's in between. And I was sort of like, is this a debate? Like, is this Oxford style? Do I have to pick one of these and argue it? Do I have to believe it if I'm arguing it? Where are we going with this?
I once
No, I
got
think
asked by I think it was Intelligence Squared US to participate in an Oxford debate with the following resolution: resolved, spy on me, I want to be safe. And
there you
I
go.
said to them, like, that is a crazy resolution. And there is no way to argue for it or against it that's coherent. It's like saying, I don't know. But so I refused, and they got other people to do it, and they actually ran with that resolution. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I think there's value to being able to say, like, hey, I am arguing this for the sake of argument. Like, let's have it out. It'll be a fun debate, fun conversation. Problem is, then those clips get decontextualized, and then all of a sudden you're just kind of out there on the internet making some insane argument, and nobody realizes that you were doing it as part of some Oxford debate, and then they decide that this is your sincerely held opinion, and you have to answer for that for the rest of your life. So, no, I think. Look, it's an interesting topic. I'm sort of surprised that media is going with this narrative now in October, or we're not even in October. It's September 25th. And it's kind of like, well, it's called the October surprise for a reason, right? There's a whole lot that's still going to happen between now and November. Also, if it turns out that nothing happens, that's actually fantastic. Like, wouldn't it be nice to have a boring election? Wouldn't it be nice if if there's a wide margins, whatever direction it goes, and there's no insanity between the election and the inauguration? I think that actually be fantastic, honestly. So it's a one of these weird positions to be in, to try to just explain, like, things are different. There is interesting potential. There are interesting potential risks, and also it's not something to actually panic over. But this is not a very compelling, exciting argument to throw a headline on.
God forbid somebody makes the argument that, yeah, AI and disinformation are substantial problems that we need to think about, and we need to have reasonable approaches to, but no, they are not going to destroy the world. So let's actually take that um, as a working premise, that here that proposition is interesting, and we're allowed to say, yes, it's a serious problem, not the end of the world, is a
Yeah.
legitimate space here, and let's spend the hour exploring that. So, first of all, why not the end of the world? What about the extreme alarm position strikes you as evidently wrong?
So it assumes that when people see content, they believe it, or it changes their mind, or it has an impact. And most of the time, it doesn't. That's just not how um, it works. And hi, Eve. Um, and so there is a little bit of a of a kind of incorrect assumptions about whether merely seeing content is going to sway people's opinions. So that's kind of part one. Part two, it assumes that it's going to be amplified and people are going to see it, period, right? So even maybe one step before whether they're going to believe it, the question of will they actually see it is an interesting one. Oftentimes, we have these bots that are pushing out now LLM produced garbage constantly, and nobody ever sees it. It's just not interesting. They get no engagement. So you see this a lot in conversations about foreign state actors, right? The mere fact that they are there comes with this belief that they have done something, and oftentimes that's not true. They're there, but they're not having an impact. The mechanisms for how it might shift things, like the sort of analysis of like what risk it what it can do. It is better for targeting. It is better for persuasive language. There are dynamics by which it could impact people, but there's also no evidence that it's really reached that threshold of sophistication. So I think that there's also another reason to pay attention to it now is that this is the worst it's ever going to be, right? So it's going to get better 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 8 years from now. So I think that's the other area where paying attention to it makes sense. But it's a risk, it's a phase shift, but that's kind of where we have to think about it in those terms, not in terms of the sky is falling and we have to have a moral panic about it.
Ev, are you here in your capacity as somebody who has a question or in your capacity as someone who's co-hosting today?
I have a question. I can stay on camera afterwards or not, as you prefer.
No, it's as you prefer. You will either dismiss yourself or you won't. And you'll either keep asking questions or you won't, depending on your unreviewable discretion.
Okay, good. So maybe I'll start with the question and see after. I was actually wondering, in 2016, was the moral panic about social media present in like during the campaign, or it only started when Donald Trump was elected? So,
It was
and
much
conversely, if Donald Trump was elected uh, this year, would we start moral panicking about AI and blaming everything on this? Even though at the moment it doesn't seem to be playing a huge role.
I think there would have to be some kind of big thing that happened in order for people to make that claim. I don't think that there's I think in 2016 you saw the public was beginning to become aware of fake news, right? Which at the time Facebook was having, it had trending topics still. These sort of crazy spam sites were getting a lot of pickup. They were getting a lot of traffic and they were getting a lot of attention. Um, it didn't necessarily mean that it was changing people's minds, but it was a part of the political discourse. I think that was where initial public concern came about after Trump was elected. That question of had those fakes had an impact. And one reason why it was very difficult to answer that question is that nobody really had visibility into social media engagement data or anything like that. It was kind of completely opaque. Um, the Russia stuff started a little bit after that, right? And that was there were like different facets of the Russia stuff. The stuff that I paid attention to most was the social media, kind of manipulation, which was real, right? I mean, they were there, they were doing it, and again, there was this question of could we possibly get data to actually look at that so we could have a sense of what impact it had and how it operated. And that data didn't really come down until mid 2017. So I think by that point, they were late 2017. Actually, it was like December of 2017 or so. I think when the companies turned that data over. So there was this had a long period of people trying to figure out what had happened, and there were many think pieces written about just Donald Trump being particularly adept and populist candidates, particularly populist right candidates, just doing a very good job using social media and that kind of ability to galvanize supporters and to sort of shift public perception, the role that had. And I think it was, in fact, him using those technologies better than his opponent. That was the actual thing that made the difference, not so much the fake news by itself or Russian actors by themselves. It's kind of like he tapped into a phase shift at the right moment in time.
All right, so I want to ask you in this context about how we should understand the tenant media stuff. And for those who don't know, this is an indictment that has come down, I guess, about 2 weeks ago, that accuses, I think, a Canadian group of sort of fronting for RT and buying a whole lot of right-wing influencers. So on the less alarmed side, Renee, you could point out rightly that the reach of as you've been arguing, the reach of they pay $100,000 for a video and it gets very few clicks. People aren't actually that interested in Russian propaganda. And so you've paid an already rich right-wing influencer to make a video that is kind of anti-Ukraine, pro-Russia, and what happens if you did that and nobody came, right? As the old anti-war demonstrators would say. On the other hand, let me make the more alarmed case. Creating your own influencers like at 10GOP, and creating real audience for it is hard.
Yeah.
Buying an existing influencer is comparatively easy. Relative, it's a matter of money. And once somebody like Tim Pool or Benny Johnson has made a video saying, I love Vladimir Putin, fuck Ukraine, they're not going to easily go on Twitter and say, rah, rah, Ukraine. And so what you're actually buying is not the specific video. It's you're buying them having made the video and then not really wanting to contradict stuff that they've said because that's a position that they've taken. And so my question is, how do you assess whether buying an influencer who makes a video, how do you assess what you've bought? Is it the specific video? Is it that now you own a little piece of Benny Johnson? Is it that, if you get him to make a video saying, I'm pro Putin, that he's then not going to go on Fox News and say, give Zelensky everything he's asking for? What are you paying for, and what's the payout?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's some interesting data sets on this that actually I think European intelligence got their hands on. There have been a couple of different leaks or hacks, depending on, I'm not 100% sure of the provenance where the Europeans got it, but there have been data sets that have come out of actually the Russians talking about their strategy and what they think they're buying. So they actually do weigh in on this as they try to justify, I guess, perhaps like you see this from China. They have to kind of justify their existence so they get their next their next round of funding, presumably. Some bureaucrat has to rubber stamp the next round. So in that case, like they are, we assume, exaggerating how effective something has been so that they can continue to justify that money coming in to keep running operations. So we don't take this as entirely truthful, but the way that they describe it is that first of all, they say they have been almost entirely shut out of the Western media ecosystem. And you've seen them also say that they're shut out of the Ukrainian media ecosystem, where they also were trying to be influential for a while. A lot of the videos that they're making saying that, we saw this operation that they ran on TikTok primarily, name checking very specific members of the Ukrainian government, saying that they secretly owned dashas, that they secretly owned, they had drivers, they were living large, and they were corrupt, basically was the point of the narrative. And they were arguing that, they did that particular one on Twitter with fake accounts. Some of their fake accounts got millions of views. Some of them got no views. I looked at that data set. It was actually virtually identical content, but because TikTok's algorithm is what it is, some of them got promoted and some of them did not. So you see them kind of assessing the value of using different types of strategies to get into particular markets. They talk about, in the Wagner leaks, they said something about paying some amount of money for an article in a paper that they cared about, it like a newspaper, essentially, almost the way a PR team would describe it, right? We got our guy, coverage placed in this magazine. This is how much we spent on it, and this is the reach it had, and these are the engagement metrics it got. So a lot of the stuff that you see coming out of these leaks reads the way a marketing firm would. This is interesting because, as anybody who's been in marketing will tell you, oftentimes you don't actually know if you're having any actual impact. You're just kind of looking at these metrics that, where you can get them, and then seeing, for example, if a phrase that you said got picked up, if you shaped the direction of narrative. And so one of the things I think they are doing is buying access to a market. And then, as you note, once somebody's really invested and committed, then they're likely, in this particular case with Tenet Media, they found people who already had some degree of sympathy, right? They were already ideologically aligned, and they just kind of nudged them a little bit in the direction they wanted them to go. So for people who don't know, they said things like, when that massacre happened in Moscow, the ISIS massacre, they hinted at was it Moscow? It was in Russia somewhere. They were hinting. This is the big one at the arena. They were hinting that there was a that the Ukrainians, some Ukrainians were behind it and had pledged
Even
to,
though it was clearly an
right,
ISIS
even though it
K
had already
thing.
been. Yes, exactly. And so, you see that in the tenant media indictments, you see them trying to nudge things in a particular direction. So they're not taking them on a journey, right? You're not getting somebody who has never had this thought before and then paying them to say it. We've seen China do this, just for context. Like, this is not new. There were a number of influencers who were paid, who appear to have been paid, I should say, by China to say nice things about the Olympics, to say nice things or to say non-controversial things about the Uyghurs, to go on trips, and then they receive money, and then they or they receive a trip, and then they put out content. So it's not
But
it's
did
not
they
a
say it?
new
So,
strategy.
so is there any evidence that any of the tenant media people said it in contexts other than the specific videos that they made for tenant media? Because that would seem to me to be real. Like, okay, if person X is paid a crazy amount of money to make a stupid video for tenant media that nobody watches, uh, that's not a lot of value. But then if he goes on, One American Network or Fox
Well,
News
they
and
have their
says
own
the same
channel.
thing, then
Yeah,
that's
they
high
have their own.
value.
Right. I don't know in this particular case. I don't know if they ever went and rattled off that Ukraine theory outside of this content. It was sort of a weird one, right? Because one thing that's very interesting with influencers, as you note, once they've said the thing, you'll often see them commit to the thing, right? Or sort of very quietly just back away from it, but they're never going to actually repudiate it. So I think few people pulled down all of the videos before YouTube nuked them. So I imagine we'll see a little bit more of an analysis on that. But I don't know that I saw them. I don't think I saw any analysis or coverage suggesting that they had made that specific claim on all of their other channels. Because again, as you know, they're influencers and they do have their other podcasts, their other live streams and things like that they do that you know that are paying the bills the rest of the time that keep their audiences watching.
Can I ask a follow up? Yeah, as Ben alluded to, I'm Canadian, so I'm asking a question about the legal framework in the States. But like, would taking money from foreign actors, it's something protected by the First Amendment, or you could regulate this kind of behavior?
So there's the Foreign Agent Registration Act. That is one of the ways in which, and that I'm trying to remember, gosh, that, I mean, the goal of FARA was to ensure that the ownership of media was transparent so that if you did see states or the not only media, but speakers, communications that were paid for by a state, to make sure that the public could be aware that that was happening while allowing that entity to speak, in the kind of US free speech marketplace of ideas culture. So that was where that originally came from. I don't know at what threshold you have to actually go and register as a foreign agent. We have seen this come up in a couple of different Russian media properties. This wasn't even the first one. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was In the Now and Soapbox, which were these sort of left-leaning Instagram and Facebook media properties mostly. They had stuff on other platforms, but they were sort of biggest on Facebook and Instagram. And this was another one of these, like, an RT anchor had left RT and then moved to the US and then set up a shell company kind of basically, or some LLC or whatever, where she had like 49% ownership. And then I think Anno Tavina-Vosti, through some complicated nesting doll of, sub outlets, owned the other portion of this outlet, and then they claimed it was independent. The reason this attracted a lot of attention is that Facebook slapped a Russian state media label on it. Also, the name of the channel In the Now was formerly a Russian TV program, formerly an RT program, and then they just kind of like moved it over, pretended that now it was American because it was physically headquartered in LA. and then Facebook slapped a Russian state media label on it. They got very, very pissed about that, and they sued Facebook. And not only did they lose, they also, it turned out, were receiving some amount of money per month from, if I'm not mistaken, it was TV Novosti. And so it was, again, that, one of those somewhere in that layer, that multi-layered, like 3-tiered ownership structure. They were receiving money from a Russian government media entity, and so they had to go and register. So it was it's not the first time that FARA and registration has come up in this context.
And
more visibility into it, but
yeah, so the problem here is that the entity, there's several layers at which this operates, right? There's one is the media organization supposed to register under FARA? And the answer to that is yes. But the second question is, at the influencer level, what are they supposed to do? And the answer is they are supposed to not have known where this money was coming from. Now, whether one believes that or not, it's fair to say that the government did not develop evidence that they were aware of the situation. So if you are taking money in order to take direction from a foreign principal about your public advocacy activities, you have to register under FARA. There's no rule that says you can't do it, but you do have to register. If you are not taking direction, you're simply exercising your First Amendment rights, even if your opinions happen to dovetail exactly with what's on RT that day, as long as the initiative is yours. So if Benjamin Wittes wants to watch RT every day and be an influencer that parrots the Russian line, you're free to do that under the First Amendment. The moment you are taking direction from RT as to what to say, or from some shell entity set up by RT, call it Tenet Media, and you're doing that, you have to register. So I think the framework is fairly clear. There are a group of cases right now that test how aggressively the government can use that framework. One of which involves somebody who I think Renee and I both know, Sumi Terry, who is accused of conducting activity on behalf of the South Korean government. I'm sure in her defense, will argue that she was just doing what think tankers do. So that line is fuzzy, and it has been it is defined, I think, mostly in the actual use of the statute, which is of course old and was written more broadly than it would be today. So how exactly you implement it is a hard question. So Renee, I want to go back to the original framing, which is, not the end of the world, not the end of democracy, but not a moral panic either. What are the concerns when you look at disinformation, and particularly disinformation fueled by AI, that you look at and say, these are the areas that I'm concerned about in an electoral context? If we stipulate that, okay, it's not going to be, the end of democracy as we know it, why should we not then just shrug and say, you know, fuck it, we didn't used to have radio and now we have radio, and and so nothing's ever changed.
I think the well, first of all, a couple things. Like as I've been prepping for this whole, like, disinformation, moral panic, or the the end of democracy kind of thing, um, I've actually been spending most of my time in prior media eras, right? I've been reading docs from World War I, World War II, right? Because it's not a new problem. So what were the arguments that they made then? And a lot of the efforts were really around raising awareness and educating the public. So active measures working groups sat out there just releasing evidence whenever they had it, just really locked down, buttoned up everything about it. We've seen the IC do this recently too, where they're just laying out the evidence, making sure that it's kind of transparently communicated to the public, like what is going on, what operations they have awareness of. And I think that's great. And again, it's not so much what technology was used, because in a lot of the stuff from active measures working group, you're looking at forgeries, right? You're looking at forged letters, at things that didn't exist, right? Print, literally paper. So there is this. So the question is more of like, what is the process for response, regardless of what is the technology that created the collateral, we might call it, right? But as far as what is the technology that created the collateral, there are some really interesting things that you can do today with regard to forgeries, like particularly voice forgeries. And that, I think, is actually an interesting one, because there's, assume that the election is close. And we've already seen the delegitimization claims have begun, right? Trump is on Truth Social posting about rig this, fraud that, multiple times a day. And so he's laying the groundwork identically to what we saw in 2020. Those same exact narratives are coming out. And one of the things that we saw in 2020 was this effort to produce evidence to support the rumor. So the rumor starts, the claim is made, and then the evidence backfills it. So you're not starting from evidence and coming to a theory of the case. You're going in the opposite direction. You've got the claim, then you're going to go find the evidence to substantiate it. So I think for things like, you remember Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, there was this allegation that they were passing a thumb drive to each other, and just random decontextualized snippets of grainy video or out there, as like purported evidence of, not only in that case, but other allegations of fraud related to ballot counting. I think there's a very real chance that you have something like leaked audio, quote unquote, leaked audio, manufactured fake audio from some sort of vote counting facility, in which you hear two people talking to each other and saying, like, did you bring the ballots in? Yes, I did. I've got them. Let's count them now, or something along those lines, which again will just be used to support. It'll be offered up as evidence, as collateral, as justification to support the claim that they want to make. And the issue now is that in 2024, you do have incredibly low trust, right? Depending on which side is making a claim and who it helps. You do have this question of, can you believe what you see with your eyes or what you hear with your ears? If a real audio of that were to emerge, would people trust it? Who goes what direction on that? Who trusts the authenticator? How fast does the authentication happen? That's the part where, I think it is it does provide the capacity to produce collateral to support the same old claims that, that have been with us for a very long time around elections, but to give it kind of extra believability, because all of a sudden you have people who are going to say, no, I heard the video, it sounded just like him. Or
So I want to point out that we have a really interesting test case of this right now, which is that the Republican candidate for governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson, has been found to have, I'm going to state this as neutrally as I can, CNN reported that he had posted all kinds of interesting things in a porn site in the comments about being a Black Nazi and wanting slavery back. And his response is that this is retroactively AI generated material and that none of this is real. And remarkably, a lot of people don't seem to believe him about this. And so his staff has resigned, and a lot of people are calling for him to get out of the race. It's too late for that now. And so my question to you, Renee, is why isn't this actually a great experiment in trust? So
So
when Mark Robinson says, you know, the stuff about me wanting to buy slaves and have a few myself, that's not me. That's a retroactive AI generation. Miraculously, nobody seems to take that very seriously. But maybe if you know, something similar happened, and Mike DeWine, the you know, very straight laced, uh, you know, nice guy Republican governor of Ohio, said the same thing, you know, people would actually be like, yeah, that doesn't seem like Mike DeWine. I'm actually going to believe that that's an AI thing. Isn't this like really just a giant way of making us think about how much we trust political figures?
yeah, totally, and media, right? Because again, there's the thing with you know, our our guy in North that guy in North Carolina there is I mean, first of all, like generative AI doesn't come with a time machine, right? And you know, there are web archives and things like this, right? There would have to be like a massive conspiracy to do that. Also, ironically, one thing that was very funny to me about that excuse was that I was like, well, which model would you have used to generate that kind of content? I mean, most of the publicly available ones won't produce that sort of that sort of stuff there. The adult content was extraordinary. But you do see that
Yeah, when
um
you're an AI that's
uh,
producing content that CNN won't report,
right, no, this
you
is very
know
this
that that's like the content moderators have failed at that point.
so no, so there's no way an AI produced some of the material that was in that case. But think about, you know, there it is about trust, right? Think about the Access Hollywood tape from 2016 dropping now, right? 8 years later, and where you know, people didn't people heard the voice, and almost nobody at the time paused even for a second. The question was not, was it him? The question was, you know, how is he going to respond to this? Everybody believed that it was real. And today, I don't think that you'd be in that same default mindset. You'll have a different response to it. His supporters will say, "Oh, the Democrats made that," right? His you know, his opponents will say, "Of course that's him. Obviously that's him, whether it is or not," you know. And so you do have that there's going to be that rush to judgment. The thing is going to go viral. People are going to try to figure out, like, people are going to form an opinion about it, form a judgment on it long before anybody actually has the time to authenticate it. So it'll be an interesting situation. I think, you know, one parallel, the sort of counter would be, there was that Nancy Pelosi video, right, of her slurring. That wasn't made with AI. That was just you know, run of the mill, slow down the tape kind of situation. But again, it did get a lot of pickup, and the platforms had to decide how to respond to it. Because we were talking about in the beginning, like, one question here is, does it get any distribution? Does it get pickup? Does media cover it? Like, how does it reach the public? And that there too, I think the platforms are struggling to figure out what to do in this political environment. They don't want to risk having another Hunter Biden situation where they throttle something or pause something or label something, and then it turns out that they made a bad call, which means, unfortunately, that they might take the wrong lesson from that and do absolutely nothing about any of it. Um, and I don't think that's necessarily the right answer either. Are you pointing at me?
Ev? No, I was pointing at Ev.
Oh,
Okay, yeah. Well, the fact that the Mark Robinson story didn't, like, that the claim didn't work, could it be an example that all of the moral panic was actually a form of like pre-bunking or like effective? Well, we've all said, like many people have said, like these claims are overblown. It's not worth, like, don't create moral panic that will threaten this trust or like diminish the existing trust. Has it actually been sufficiently well discussed that it created a climate where we're kind of good at figuring out what is true, what is not, whether we are asking ourselves the right question or not about AI and misinformation? Has all of this conversation been productive at the end of the day, actually.
My real feeling with Mark Robinson is that there was never a doubt, even on his own side, that the stuff was real. So, and that's because people know who he is, right? It's not it's it was this was I think this was not very surprising. I think I heard again, the gossip grapevine was that like the Republicans leaked it themselves, right? This was the sort of narrative that was making its way around. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was actually a Republican oppo that was dropped in hopes of forcing him out before that deadline, which is an interesting theory, because it is then at that point sort of pure political power games to make that candidate shift happen, and it failed. They tried, it failed. Then his whole staff resigned. So I think there'll be other cases. You remember there was the Biden robocall, another faked audio situation. People were largely not deceived by that one either. The person who made it is being prosecuted and fined, if I'm not mistaken. I think maybe 6 million or something. I read he has a hefty fine to pay and is also being prosecuted. You're seeing the FEC. Actually, I don't know, Ben, what your opinion on this is, but really just stall. I mean, that's really what they're doing, right? There's like
Well,
a
that's what
call
they
for
always
comment.
do.
Yeah, I know they're sort of useless on the regulatory front when it comes to thinking about the intersection of technology and elections, in my opinion. But in this particular case, you're seeing a call for comments to try to figure out if candidates and campaigns should be made to disclose. So I think we'll see this conversation swirling around for a while. And again, the technology is not going to go anywhere. So coverage of deepfake videos really began in 2018. It was sort of the first ones that sort of educating the public about what the potential was, really began quite some time ago now. So I think the question is like, do you trust you're going to form your opinion based on, does the content and claim seem plausible? Does it align with what you know about the person it's purporting to be about? Do you trust the side, if you will, that it helps? Or where do you fall on that side? Like and then do you trust the candidate when they deny or claim it? And do you trust the media when it offers up authentication commentary on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the discussion of this subject has been partly overly alarmed because it doesn't factor in the public degree of sophistication about what is possible and what's normal. So we have deep fakes all the time in Marvel movies that show, people flying and people breaking buildings and, and nobody takes them remotely seriously as a depiction of reality because A, we know that CGI animation is possible, and B, that we think it's cool. And similarly, good painters have been able to paint images of politicians doing lewd things, since at least the Renaissance, when they, learned about perspective and stuff. And yet, if you saw a picture of a painting of Mark Robinson with a pizza in a porn shop, that wouldn't affect your sense of whether that story is true or not, though the story is clearly true. Um, and so, like, imagine that you could tomorrow create an image of or a video of Kamala Harris saying with perfect fidelity to Kamala Harris's persona and her voice, and I am in fact comrade Kamala. I seek to impose Marxism, and my father was a Marxist professor, and I'm a devotee of Che Guevara. Right. Imagine, and you show her, shaking hands as a young girl with Chairman Mao or something, right? Like, imagine you could do that and it would look perfectly good. That wouldn't be the first time you saw something like that. That you would be, by that point, awash in a media environment in which people do that sort of thing all the time. And there's like great videos of Taylor Swift, doing whatever some terrible thing somebody wants to do with Taylor Swift's image. And there's just a kind of an increased skepticism. And so the relevant question will be, when this video appears, what does Kamala Harris say about it? And, if she says, I never met Chairman Mao as a 5-year-old, and that's, I never said any of those things, then it seems to me the question would just be like, do you believe her? And if you do, then that question isn't really very different from if you painted a picture of her shaking hands with Chairman Mao. So my question is, how much of this is, really about the, once it becomes easy to do these things, people will be very sophisticated about the fact that they're mostly garbage.
I think we don't know the answer to that yet. So the thing that I'm presenting tomorrow is work on spam and scams. And the reason I think spam and scams are interesting are because they're not politically motivated, right? You've got people who have a pure financial motivation. And one thing that we've seen since the internet, since the dawn of the internet, has been that people who are financially motivated are very on top of using new technologies and doing very interesting things with them, because they can take advantage of that brief differential before the public understands the scam or knows what they're dealing with. And you do see people responding, like believing, for example, with audio deepfakes, where people receive phone calls saying that their loved ones have been abducted, right? And a hostage kind of clip is played in the voice of their child. Right? I know a person who this happened to personally. And these sorts of things really affect the people. Like, people give money, they believe it when it is happening. They don't think like, oh, this is a hoax. There's actually now kind of a government website, PSA, is trying to explain that this is a thing that happens and what you should do in the situation. But when they hear the voice, people do believe it, which is interesting, and they react as if it's real. Or in the context of AI products, images of, like, there's one that I really wish was real. It's a, those stand mixers that have like the kind of like elongated heads. There was one I saw that was like, it looked like a xenomorph from Alien, black, and it had these like teeth, and it was like a stand mixer.
Who in turn looks shockingly like Rudy Giuliani, I just want to point out.
But I was like, man, I would buy that product, and you see these things that, where people actually do get duped, because now there are a lot of scammers who generate images of products that can't be real, that aren't real, and nonetheless sell it. You see people trying to set up scam listings for Airbnbs, for properties that don't exist. And that question of how much can you expect a person, like how much mental effort can you expect an ordinary person to do to verify that what they're engaging with is real? And so it's these sort of low level areas in which the harm is financial, but but you are seeing this question of what is your default state when it comes out? We might be much more highly attuned to bullshit in politics because of the nature of politics. And so what we see in spam and scam land may be just a, psychologically completely different experience for people. But I think that question of what can you accomplish with it? What are the harms? Like, it's really much more being realized over in other areas. And so I think the question that's going to come up probably tomorrow and like the sessions will be, where are the overlaps, and where are the areas where like our kind of mental model of this particular type of adversarial abuse is similar to disinformation versus where it's just a completely different thing.
Ev?
Yeah. Can I? Okay, thanks. Actually, in your book, you talk about like education responses to Father Coughlin and stuff like that. If we tie it up with what you just talked about regarding scams, what would like education measures and like the Propaganda Institute pamphlet to explain what to be cautious about would look like for disinformation, for AI stuff? What
Yeah,
would you teach?
I remember we used to do this. There's a whole thing. It's so quaint now. Like 2 years ago, maybe I think this was 2022, like Christmas or something. We put out this paper about this scam ring that was using GANs generated faces, AI generated faces on LinkedIn, which again is not an environment where people are necessarily like this was sort of before people registered LinkedIn as a place that would be worthy to manipulate, right? Like, so the fake profiles that you would see on LinkedIn would be like personas backstopping an alias that was really being used on Twitter or Facebook, right? So accounts that would communicate on Facebook and Twitter, we saw this with Chinese accounts, would create LinkedIn profiles just so that there would, if you search the person's name, there would be like a kind of a profile of them around the internet. And then people started to realize that you could create AI generated faces and you could actually like reach out to people. We called the paper like "This salesperson does not exist." And it was just another one of these studies in manipulation, because you did see people accepting contacts like from these people. And we wound up writing a thing with like NPR. We sort of crawled this network. We found a couple hundred of them. And then NPR wanted to do a PSA. And I really have to say, like, this was one of these things where I was like, everybody knows this already. Like, nobody's going to pay attention. It was like huge. Everybody paid attention because we were saying, like, the earrings are going to be irregular. The hair blends into the collar. The hair's a little bit crazy. The eyes are like looking in the middle distance. The face is in the form of a grid. You should expect to see like the following structures. And there was this entire like PSA for how to identify GANs generated faces. This is a particular type of AI, generated adversarial networks. And now the sort of more preferred means for generating images are the diffusion model images, which do not have that constraint, right? It's not the same. There are far fewer things that we can point to each time. Like we can say, okay, the fingers are going to be gnarly, but that was last year. The fingers are actually just fine right now. You might assume that the skin is going to be hyper realistic, but now there are they're called LoRa's, like lightweight model add-ons that you can use to make the skin less perfect, right? You can actually do a whole lot. You can draw like a little stick figure and have your image render in that way. I remember when Midjourney and some of the others became available, one of the first things I tried to do was generate images of the same person in different settings. And that, and also at different ages. I wanted to know, like, when you see a Facebook profile picture, like if you go to mine now, I've had a Facebook account for like 20 years by virtue of being old. And so, or 15 years or whatever it is. And so I was like, can you recreate the degree of content that you would need to have that plausibility, to have sophisticated plausibility? And the answer was still no, until again, more like this year, when all of a sudden, like, you could. And so again, like I say, the technology is like is the worst it's ever going to be, like in this moment, So
Right, but again,
like
I mean,
what tricks do you tell people? Like all the hair and earrings and eyes and all that stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all anymore. The fingers, again, doesn't matter anymore. So I don't know that teaching people to recognize details for common model mistakes is useful 2 years into the future. I think that, and this is why even the automated detectors get fooled by some of what's out there. And that, I think, is why I don't know that telling people look at the windows of the log cabin and see to see if they're real is necessarily the best advice I can give people.
It's all going to come down to trust.
Yeah.
And by the way, just like it always has, in the sense that it has always been possible in a very manual way to doctor images, to doctor
Right.
Forge letters, and why do we not trust the czarist secret police when they produce the protocols of the elders of Zion? It's not because of any forensic, right? It's because, every Jewish community in the world says that's garbage, right? And ultimately, and because there were some forensic cues too, of course, but like people have always tried to forge stuff, and eventually Like if somebody forges your image doing something that as a politician or as a high school student or whatever that you want to not be responsible for having done, you get to say this is garbage. And the question becomes, do people believe you? And I just think there's like, at the end of the day, I think different people are differently situated in that regard. And in some cases, the denial, like Mark Robinson, is going to be a subject of mirth. And in some cases, the denial is going to be the end of the conversation because the person's believable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the questions of people believing another area that I'm talking about tomorrow is actually the non-consensual nudes problem, right? It is actually that. I think I think it's very, for celebrities or for people who have a presence or even people who are, prominent online. Um, it's not that hard to say, no, that's not me, right? Or to mock it, to speak out against it. And you're seeing particularly prominent YouTube women on YouTube are really getting quite vocal about speaking out about their images being used in this way, like their likenesses, I should say, being used in this way. Um, but I think it's very hard still for ordinary people um, to have that same capacity for response. So I think, if you search somebody's name because you're doing a background check for a job and nudes come up, right, or their name shows up on one of these adult content sites, there's a question of, does the person go back and actually ask, do they have that conversation, or is it something where when this stuff is out there about you? I mean, look, it's it's pretty hard to respond to smear campaigns. It always has been, and it's only getting worse in that regard. So this again is where I come back a lot of the time to the focus on its use in politics. It is a little bit of a different sphere because of who it targets and
Yep.
how. But that question of, the random poll worker being accused of, having of that being their voice, and them being,
I
saying
am
terrible
much
things
more
about someone else.
concerned I'm much more concerned about the random poll worker and
Yeah,
about
same.
the random high school student,
Yeah.
where, this stuff creating fake nudes of people is rampant all over high schools right now. And that is not considered a major disinformation problem because high school students don't matter. Politicians matter. And a lot of this problem is really a question of who we decide matters. And I actually think the high school students matter. But
Oh, me too. Well, I remember the first kind of outreach we got when I was at SIO a couple years back. We got some outreach about like bills. I'm trying to remember. I think Amy Klobuchar was one of the people who was introducing one, trying to, just one of these. You get asked for feedback when you're in academia, and some of these things come out, right? And this one was about like giving politicians a right to sue if their likenesses were, were misused. And I was like, I get where you're going for here. I understand why you think it's important, but like, there's a lot of women who have been on the receiving end of this stuff, and I see no momentum towards creating a federal bill for them. Like, that's where the attention should be on this, not on the
yep.
politicians who can get on CNN that night and say that, and disavow that it's them, or say that it is them, or whatever direction it goes. But really, the focus, the harm, is on the people who don't have the capacity or the power to respond, and that's
If
where the attention really needs to
you
be.
have access to CNN to deny it, your plight is not the problem.
Right.
All right. We're going to leave it there because it's 4:59, and unlike In Lieu of Fun, Dog Shirt TV does begin and end on time. Renee DiResta, I'm for the half of our audience who thinks the world is ending because of disinformation. You've thrown a wet blanket over the alarm. And for the other half of the audience who thinks, that the first half are crazy people and therefore there's no problem. You've lit a fire under their ass. You're a great American, and it's good to see you. Come
Likewise.
back anytime.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Hey, folks, we're going to be back, but I'm not sure when because I don't know who our next guest is. So at some point, you're going to get a scheduling email from me. I meant to send it all over the weekend, but I didn't. So I sent it yesterday, and that's just the way it works. So deal with it. See you next time.